Live from the Washington, D.C. area, it's the Inside Scoop, all the news that our viewers want to know. Now, here's the host.
Hi folks, Cesar here. Thanks for joining us. Special night tonight. We're about a week and a day out from the election of 2018. And with me, I've got some guests that I want you to know. Herndon, if you haven't heard, it's a great little town in Northern Virginia, quite frankly, the gem of the corridor. It's a microcosm of our country. And I've got three guests here that are running for council that I really want you to meet. I'll just introduce them by name: Roland Taylor, Sean Kinnis, and Pradeep Dakal. All these men have been activists in the community. I think you're going to enjoy hearing from them, their views, and kind of how we work things out going forward. Gentlemen, thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, great to have you here. Roland, thanks for coming back. Sean and Pradeep, first-time guests. Let's just talk about stuff. Herndon, what's happening in Herndon? What's on your mind? Let's kick it off.
So one of the things that made this different is this is our second cycle for a November election.
Right.
Because traditionally, Herndon, like many of the other towns in Fairfax and across Virginia, about 140 plus towns and cities have had their elections in May.
Right.
For a couple of reasons. One, to keep them less partisan. The other was, especially in the Northern Virginia and Fairfax, is because of the Hatch Act, and if it's partisan elections, then it disenfranchises federal employees that wouldn't be able to participate. Mm-hmm. And a couple of years ago, the current town council moved the elections from May to November. Mm-hmm. So the last election was 16, and they're on even cycles, is what we're on now. So we hit presidential, so we're during the last presidential election. Mm-hmm. And that made it quite different than anything we'd ever seen before. It changed the dynamic on it.
And that was a 4-3 vote, correct?
I think that's correct.
Yeah. Okay.
So, and again, the biggest contention was most people want to have a referendum about it,
sure.
Let the people decide on it.
Yeah.
And so that was disheartening to a lot of people who didn't feel like they got to voice their opinion on it, and potentially all the hearings. It really did look like more people were against it. Now, there were several other initiatives they were trying at the same time, moved from 2-year terms to 4-year terms, and some other admin issues related to it. When it was said and done, the only thing that stayed, that they continued, and then got the charter changed in Richmond, was to move the elections from May to November. So that just puts us and Falls Church as the only two in Fairfax that went to November. The remainder due May.
Mm-hmm. So what was let me kind of go back in that time, which was May of 2014. So you kind of go back to that point after a May election. What was kind of driving that thought? I mean, what was kind of going on? I was trying to remember what was going on in the town at the time, and I don't know why that ended up becoming such a big issue when things seemed to have been going pretty well. So was there any reason you can remember why that was happening?
More representation, more people vote in November. That was kind of the mindset that I was hearing. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So referendum would have been nice. Probably should have done it through referendum. I think most people want to have a voice in it. Then I started to hear, well, when do you have the referendum? Do you have it in May when fewer people vote, or do you have it in November when more people vote?
Well, there could be ways, if you did a May election, to actually motivate some folks to vote. I mean, you could. I know these days we seem to have elections with polls open months, weeks ahead of the actual election. So, if you were to have an election in May that could potentially kind of keep it more independent, keep more conversation, keep more ideas about the town, could you do some things that could actually maybe still stimulate that vote, like maybe increase the time that you have people to vote? Could you do, so there's some states now that actually do mail-in voting, and could you actually potentially do something like that in order to satisfy that requirement and still then maybe get it back to a situation where you could really, really focus on the issues of the town? And that maybe those are some ways to try to help that a little bit. Mm-hmm. And satisfy everybody. When we kind of think about this whole time of inclusion and transparency, can we kind of get to an answer that gets to all of them? I don't know, maybe.
Yeah, in 2016 election, it was a presidential race as well. Mm-hmm. So a lot of people who are not regular voters, and a lot of people who are not much aware of the local issues also turned out to vote, because it was about presidential, right? So it's more about quantity versus quality as well. So if we keep it to May, the people who are more aware of the local issues and who want to participate in the local issue come out and vote. But when it goes to November, then everybody comes and vote because it becomes more partisan as well.
Yeah, I will say that campaigning in the last election, then your message is overshadowed with all the partisan politics of federal elections. Again, by not moving it to odd years for rotations, then it is always going to put you in that presidential every 2 elections. And one, it's more expensive for the candidates. You're lost in the messaging. There's a federal focus, and then it's more expensive for you. And again, the partisan, you'd go to a door and knock on a town election, and we don't show parties. We're independent candidates. It's a nonpartisan election per the charter. And many people wouldn't talk with you unless you told them what party they were with. And so they wouldn't talk, they were kind of deaf to town issues. And then people were numb to some of the arguments in the partisans, and I don't expect that 2 years from now that it'll be any less than it was. So it's more expensive. The ads and other things are more expensive for the candidates during that time. Then the key to it was that made this one different was saying that it was not going to be a partisan election. They were just moving it for more inclusion. But on that same next election, extended their terms 6 months with no referendum, changed the election, no referendum, and on the very next election, they were on a party. The entire town council was on a party ballot. So it appeared, you could easily come back and say that was intended strictly to do that. And then you've got political party canvassers and party people out there, and they're mailing out ballots. So it's, an average citizen that's truly an independent candidate can't go up against a political machine during a presidential election.
And again, a microcosm of the country. It is impossible for independents, Green Party, whatever these other parties are or candidates try to represent, they're overshadowed by the established two-party system. That is a huge issue. It's going to be a huge issue. I would like to see that thing broken. I've often said that the two-party system's not going to work. It's going to be the long-term destruction of, quite frankly, true representative government.
Well, most citizens in a lot of surveys you see, when they actually question them about the issues, the few they are aware about, most people are centrist.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And they're not far right, far left, and most people can sit down and disagree civilly with those, and that's really the majority of people. Unfortunately, they're not the message that we hear, out in the media and other stuff. It's far right, far left, but most people, the majority of the country, I believe, are civil. Discussion is going to be held, and it's not as partisan.
How about term limits?
Before we go to term limits, I think it's a great topic, but because that's one way to maybe do that. And if you think about, people seem to get, I know I'm this way, when the issue starts boiling up, you start getting involved, right? When you start really reading about that one issue in the town or even in the nation, that's when you kind of start getting, you know what, I didn't know that, I need to learn that. And maybe if we're talking about those issues in a more focused election, maybe you end up getting people more involved sooner, and then you don't end up with the rush at the end. But one potential way, I call it the mechanical, how do we actually maybe leverage some of those things in order to get people to vote in a May election? Maybe it's term limits. Maybe if we actually were to have, maybe it's 2, maybe it's 3, whatever the number, just think what would be happening today in this election in Herndon if we actually had term limits. There would be a lot more people who would have the opportunity to serve and bring in new blood, so to speak, and new opinions, because there would be people who would have to be moving on. And I just think that's really, really good. Now, you can go have a lot of debate about term limits, right? There's all kinds of research on both sides. It kind of almost ends up being like religion, whether you just think it's time to make that move and do it or not.
So one concern is that if you lose the institutional knowledge, if you don't do it in a staggered manner when you initiate it, then you would lose all your institutional knowledge at one time, potentially, if they'd all been on the same rotation. But you could even stagger at that, but it does keep fresh minds in. It knocks out some of those, partisan groups and their representatives in there. It makes them come up and initiate new people on.
Most boards have the staggered sort of rotation. Not everyone's up all at once. Another thing I'd like to see us discuss is a code of conduct ethics in the charter. There doesn't seem to be sort of any way to hold elected officials responsible for their behavior, right? You can pretty much do anything. And okay, maybe you get censured, but there's nothing at the town charter level that says, you know, if you behave in a certain way, if you sort of deny taking money from developers, I mean, just, there's nothing that says this constitutes some pretty crazy behavior and we ought to consider censuring someone. There's nothing that compels someone to behave a certain way that's good in the town's interest. Thoughts on code of conduct, ethics reforms?
I think it makes a lot of sense.
No.
I mean, if there was a way to implement it, I certainly think it would be something to do, and then you could have the getting back to the conversation piece.
Right.
Right. What topics do we put in there? Drive the conversation, drive the inclusion of the town, right? Making sure people are kind of bringing in that information and open it up so that everybody has an opinion.
Absolutely. I mean, the code of conduct should be in place. If there is any mechanism that we can pull, and we can put the code of conduct, because you know, what are you doing, what are you saying, and obviously, you know, like you said, you know, if you are taking donations, from whom you are taking, these things has to be considered. You know, this definitely has to be considered from builders or anybody in the town. So obviously there should be some kind of mechanism that can really put people on a right track. And I mean, seen those things not being in the right place in Herndon, I can tell you that. Yeah.
I mean, could you say something like, if there's certain folks who are putting in bids for something, that they couldn't be involved in donations, I guess? I mean, is that something that you
Well,
can
you
do,
have to
or?
disclose, right? You have to
Right.
do your disclosures when topics come up for discussion. But still, let's say we're buddies, I'm a developer, I've given you 10, 20 grand. Even if you disclose I've donated to you, what are the chances are that you're not going to be somewhat biased towards favoring my decision, right?
And I'd say back to term limits,
Well,
right?
yeah.
Back to this representation.
That's-
If
I like
you
that.
know
I like that.
you only have, you know, one term left, or you're limited by 2 terms, then, you know, you're going to be less likely to be motivated by that kind of relationship. And then, and Roland, I think you make a lot of sense that may happen with the knowledge, but I think we got a lot of smart people in Herndon who can actually make that work.
Sure. Good point. I want to come back to some of the other topics here. I know we've got a lot going on. I do like term limits, by the way. If it's good enough for the president and the governor, certainly can do it for council. Folks, join us back in a couple minutes here. We'll be right back.
Okay, so we drowned the fire,
Yep.
stirred it, drowned it again, and now just feel if it's cold.
Yeah.
Cool.
Smokey just gave me a bear hug.
I know. I already posted it.
I got a creak in my neck, limp in my step, cramping in my muscles every time I try to flex. Better than ones get on. Very sad, no more love. All that I could do was remember you. You know I usually say no, but if you throw me love, I'll throw you some more.
It's a big responsibility.
Oh, it's huge. I know, it's huge.
And the salary.
Oh my god, yes. I mean,
Right.
like, I was about to move in with my parents, and right before, yeah, so this saved me.
I really believe in you, you know?
Thank you. It's nice to hear that from someone.
These are cool. Did you, what did
we're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Hi folks, Cesar here. Welcome back to our second segment. Next topic for the panel here. Let's talk about representation and inclusion. So I know we've all heard sort of the concept. There are 3 precincts within Herndon. Representation from each precinct would actually satisfy some representation. So let's talk about some of the things that you all have been hearing. 1 representative from each district or precinct, or 2, or how do you guys see that fleshing out?
I think the idea, the simple idea, and I think it's one that Roland's mentioned a couple of times, is that you have 3 precincts, and with 3 precincts, you could very simply have 1 representative from each precinct, and then 3 at large members. A couple of things, right? If you're the representative of my precinct, and only the folks in our precinct elected you, I know who to go to, right? If you're for changing a particular service in Herndon, I'm going to go to you and go, hey, Cesar, I think that's a good or bad thing, and you actually now carry our desires, not just yours. So you're carrying the thoughts, desires, and needs of our particular precinct. Now, you may still be in a minority, right? But ultimately, you're carrying our needs, and what that also does is creates balance and inclusion. So I think it could be a great idea. I'm sure there are some reasons why it doesn't make any sense.
I think that's a good idea, actually. Having representation from precincts create more decentralization also. For example, you have particular representative from one particular precinct, like Son said, you can directly come to me if I'm your representative, and then we can directly talk about the issue over there, right? Versus not having in each precinct. So obviously that's a good idea. That also brings down to inclusion, because if we do that, obviously one precinct may have more of a certain minded people, right? And they will have their voice in there. So talking about representation through precinct means we're talking about inclusion, which is good. We're talking about decentralization of resources, of connection and everything, and which works good for the local politics.
It forces representation in those precincts, right? It mandates that precinct has a voice. I hadn't really thought about it in that context. How many of the council members live in the different precincts? Right, it's probably slanted more towards 2 and 3, I'd imagine.
It's really divided fair. When you look at the registered voters, they are, say, in the 3,000 range of it, and active voters, it's still around 2,000 plus in each one of those. So they're very balanced in that way. Our population, based on the way our density is divided, keeps that way. It wouldn't be gerrymandered in any way. But like I said, it does. The other is, remember, we're part-time, just volunteer almost. For no more than it makes, you're almost a volunteer person. When you've got a limited area, then it gives you more focus on that area, and it's going to be your geographical area, so you'll be more focused on it. Where if everybody's at large, and they're located all in, say, historic district, how often are they actually in some of those areas, and how connected are they watching every day one of the elementary schools or the middle school in the district? And we have different needs, and at different times of the day, different parts of town change. So it would allow a council person to really focus on a central area, and then 3 to really focus on the larger issues potentially. But the main thing is the inclusion of it, because the representation in some areas, if it's a higher density area, we may have minorities or disadvantaged citizens in those areas, maybe more senior citizens in another area, and they can get a representative that represents their community, as opposed to someone that's on a party ticket or the most popular in town. It doesn't give that district a flavor, and all of our districts are very unique.
So let me ask
one real small point on that. We started this whole conversation about how do we, if we were to move the elections, how do you kind of stimulate turnout? And I just have to believe that if you've got 3 representatives and you're running in precinct 1, for example, you and whoever you're running against are going to drive more turnout in that town or in that precinct in order to get more people to vote. So you might solve a May issue by having representation, because more people will be caring about their local needs.
Yeah, I like it. So hypothetically, 2020 census, there's a 4th precinct in Herndon, right? It gets redrawn because it's growing, right? So how does that alter what we're talking about here, or just that's kind of the same concept?
Why don't you
I
take
think
a
it's
stab?
going to be, yeah. I think it's going to be, I mean, even if we have 4, still, the same topic we discussed about having, representation from each person should still work with the 4 as well.
You could still do 4 and then 2 at large. Now the question I have no idea. Maybe you know. I mean, as is there some point where a particular town council grows from 6 to 8? I mean, is there if population?
In the charter. There's nothing population.
Okay. So but that could still, I think that could certainly still work. Even if the census adds a precinct.
Yeah. I was just thinking of the hypothetical. I like the idea. Just let's make it solid for growth, because as we all know, there's growth coming, right, to Herndon. So how do we manage all that?
And then you mentioned, I'll just jump into this, is the inclusion piece. If we can drive inclusion through term limits and through district representation, and the other thing that we've talked about is making the notes, the minutes available again. We can talk about that too. But if you do those things in order to kind of drive inclusion, there's been a lot of research around what does actually inclusion mean. And a really good article by a woman named T. Hudson Jordan. It's called in the Diversity Journal, where she actually talks about how do we move from diversity to inclusion, right? And actually, so diversity being the things that make us different, inclusion being how do we actually take those things that make us different and actually try to incorporate them into a way to come to better decisions in groups, right? So it's a big human resource area to try to get people to be included, not just what they say, but how they think, right? And so if you think a particular way about a particular issue, if we are including your thoughts in that, right, we come to a better decision around that. And so if we can figure out ways culturally to make sure that we're driving that kind of inclusion, then we're going to end up making better decisions.
And I second to his thought. And obviously, Herndon is a diverse community, and diversity is our strength, we say. But diversity really becomes a strength when inclusion takes place. So people from different background, people having different mindset, different beliefs, religious belief or political belief, when they are empowered, when they get their voice heard, when they are empowered, obviously, they're going to contribute more to the town, more to the society, versus when they feel they are left out. So inclusion really means empowering people and telling that, hey, we are with you and you are part of us. And when we do that, we create a great society, and diversity really becomes a strength.
Yeah, I know, Roland, we've talked about that some folks have felt disenfranchised, right? And we've talked about democracy really only works if everyone's voices are actually heard. So I like that idea. I like, empowering everyone. I am not for diminishing voices of any side. I think we've talked about, you mentioned seconding the motion. I think we've all said, let's second any motion that any council member brings to the floor. I think that's how you broaden the dialogue and you ensure everyone gets a fair shot of being heard. Because I think we can all agree what's happening now is those voices are kind of pushed to the side.
Well, again, in what's disenfranchised, a great portion of citizens, minority and party as well, is that when they moved the elections in the manner that they did, when it was clear what the motivation of it was, even though getting more people to hear more voices in the election was the theme, but in reality it was to block out, people that didn't think the same way. And then that was evident in their actions, because basically in 2 terms there have been virtually no opposing votes to anything. That means of hundreds of citizens that have gone before the town council, taken time off work, feed the kids, go down there, the green light comes on, the red light goes off 3 minutes later and you sit back down. Of all those people, not one single vote virtually was ever changed. So after a while you've deafened them, and they won't come back because they know they're not listening. It was decided in the work session, and when they came out, rarely was it ever changed. So that's one part. But what's perfect about a small town is we have so many things in common, because I always tell people even though we have 25,000 jobs in a town of 24,000 citizens, we're an amazing economy in Herndon. But the one thing that Herndon does well is our number one industry is raising families. And we've got great schools, and we can get behind our schools, and towns have that way of bringing include everybody, because we're all there for one reason. That's just to live safe and have our families and a good environment. And we've got so many issues to bring people from all different backgrounds together, and commonality in some of those topics, that we have a successful model to do it. But if they're not being listened to at the government, then they're just quiet.
Short story. Yesterday, I was out, and we're all doing the last minute, walking and talking and seeing people on the streets. And so I pass a very nice lady. She's walking her dog, and she stops and she goes, "Who are you campaigning for?" And I said, "Well, I happen to be campaigning for me." And she said, "Well, what are you about?" So we ended up having a conversation, and she said she did attend meetings, but that she was absolutely flabbergasted as to why no one was going to meetings anymore. Yeah. That there weren't many people there, and she was like, "I don't understand that, because that's your opportunity to have a conversation." So I think, kind of to Roland's point, that there are people in Herndon who maybe feel like they're not included, right? We can disagree with that, and I'm sure a lot of people do disagree with it, but there are those that do feel that way, and then all of a sudden what happens, right? You kind of do that self-fulfilling prophecy, where ultimately, well, if I'm not going to be heard, what's the if it's a foregone conclusion, then I'm not gonna take the time to do it.
So can we all agree that maybe once a month, the work session we set aside for public input? Because today the work sessions, publics can't comment on them. You have to sit there.
Sure.
And you get your 3 minutes in a public session, the public hearing. But the work sessions where the sausage is made. So would residents value being, I know it'd make the work session a lot longer, but we're not there to get out early, right? I mean, so what do you guys think about having the work sessions open to the public input?
Well, the biggest thing is so much about the open to the public. They have input at all time, so you can always send emails to others. But what's hindering it now is that the work sessions are held off in a side room. They're not in the regular chamber.
That's right.
They're not televised. Yep. You're not seeing the work. So in other words, I'm a retired police officer. I worked in public and also in federal, as well as there's certain privacy issues and concerns, HR issues, and employment things, bidding processes that we would have to cut the cameras off and do behind, in the closed session of it. And we can adjourn to that. But it's got to be out in the public, people to see it. That's where the work happens. It's called a work session.
So you can go into work session, you cut the cameras, you have those discussions, but everything else, and not every work session, but maybe, like I said, once a month, you open it up to the public and you televise it. And it's saved for posterity. That way folks know what you did.
You're here.
Folks, we'll be right back with our third segment. Thank you.
I surrender.
All right, pal. Get ready for the day, buddy.
Hey, Dad. Hey, Dad. Do we have a gun?
What's that?
Do we have a gun?
Maybe you can make retirement happen. After all, you made this vacation happen.
Double points with every purchase?
Cleverly merging promotions.
Love it.
Cross-referencing travel sites. And booking all your flights with those...
vouchers. I got us bumped.
They were like, oh. But now they're like... Aloha. You aced this vacation. Now get the tips you need to get on track at aceyourretirement.org.
I tried Oxy at a couple of parties. I thought I had it under control. I didn't know it'd be this addictive. I didn't know how far I'd go to get more.
Opioid dependence can happen after just 5 days. Know the truth, spread the truth. What to expect when you're expecting.
Like here?
A teenager.
Today, I'm going to show you how to teen-proof your home. First step, hide the car keys. Preferably somewhere they would never look. Challenges will come up. Be ready for them. Hi, honey.
Ready for the... Mom, you don't use mannequins in the mannequin challenge.
You don't have to know it all to be a perfect parent. Thousands of teens in foster care will love you just the same.
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Hi folks, Cesar here, back with our guests, candidates for Herndon Town Council. I have Roland Taylor, Sean Kinnis, and Pradeep Dakal. Gentlemen, thanks for coming back again. So we were talking about a little bit of transparency, a little bit about opening up the work sessions, televising those, recording them for posterity, so everyone knows who talked about what and how things got put together. What else can we be doing to foster this transparency for residents in Herndon?
First, what I like to do, I've meant to do this at the beginning. I want to say thank you. Thank you for having us here. I think it's a great opportunity.
Sure.
Appreciate it. And
I like
and
you
the
guys,
time,
man.
And the time you put into this. So I think it's pretty neat. Transparency is, I guess, an easy concept, right? You know, it's easily seen through, right? It's not being deceitful. How can we do things that actually drive that, right? What is your intent for having us in here, right? One of the things that we talk about in teams and in groups is what is the individual intent about why you happen to do something. And if I know your intent, right, then I can better interact with you around why we're particularly doing something. So if I know your intent because you want to make a street one-way street, right, then maybe we can better understand and have a transparent conversation about that. Kind of linking to that, how do you drive that? What's the mechanical reason about how you might do that is, and I know there's been a lot of talk about the minutes thing, right? That the minutes were maybe not full minutes, and I think the reason you hear is, well, maybe you don't need them. And I guess the one point that I'd make about that is, certainly there's some technology that we should be able to leverage to keep the cost down to do full minutes, right? Technology is amazing today. And if you look at some of the stuff that's out there, you'd think that we could leverage that so that maybe the cost isn't what it was. But have you ever tried to do research from a video?
Yeah.
Right?
That's right.
I mean, it's brutal, right? I can't do a search and replace on something. So, bringing that back. And then the other thing I think about on the transparency thing is 100 years from now, right? I mean, there's a good chance that video doesn't exist, right? Either, you lost a hard drive or it went away. But we can pretty be sure that there's a piece of paper 100 years from now that's going to exist somewhere in order to be able to have somebody do that research on. So I think if you were to get back to that, you help drive people in government in order to make sure that they're being transparent. Sorry for the long answer.
No, good stuff.
No, I guess, the transparency also comes with the empowerment. When you empower people, when people are more engaged about the town and the issues, and they obviously show up in town council meetings, and obviously the public session is public, but work session is not, as Roland just mentioned. So if we make it more transparent, so people exactly know what issue we are discussing, and there might be a 30 minutes or 1 hour or 2 hour long video, and how do you go and look what issue you want to look, right? And obviously, like Son said, technology is great, and we can always divide those into issue specific. And rather than people coming and researching what they are looking for, I think we should be diligent enough to put forth those agendas and minutes to people. This is what we discussed, this is what everybody's point was, and this is what we decided. So people know what exactly our town council is doing, and where our council members stand in terms of their belief into certain things. So obviously we need to make it more transparent on that, so people exactly know, what their representative are doing.
So I think this is what's great about you gentlemen. Fresh minds, new ideas. I mean, I think some people get institutional in their thinking. So, I mean, I like this. I think it's great. I mean, there are certain infrastructure, technology upgrades that the town can be doing to make it easier for folks to gain information, to have access. Because right now, to your point, you do a search on something, it's not contextualized, there's no taxonomy associated with anything that's been recorded. You have to listen to the whole thing.
Yeah, so
Nobody has time to do that.
Yeah, it's been an excuse, that they said, well, it's there, you can go see it. But being a university professor, then the technology, and especially for disabled and citizens, then in the university level, it's not just closed captioning, it's not just transcripts, it's a combination of all, as well as the conceptual deals of sounds and others that have to be, kind of closed captioned in as well too. And at the university level, we're required to do that because we know that our students come from diverse, disadvantages, and so we have to make sure that it's accessible. Well, our government should definitely be doing that. I mean, we've got citizens, elderly citizens, and maybe they need the closed captions parts of it. All the technology is going to pull those words out of it. I mean, we all know commercial software, Dragon Speak or something. You can sit there. And it's so simple to do it now in a lot of ways because so many people do it. The cost is down. But for our citizens that can't see, can't hear, then they need transcripts of that, as well as there shouldn't be anything to hide anyway. But they wanted to make it difficult for us to see. They closed off the work session so you don't see what contractors or developers may be in there or interested parties that have been invited to the work session. And often though, that's where we hammered things out. And you're going to see what we talked about, the compromises we made. You're going to see the real work in a work session. And by not televising those, the person comes in, and if they had been able to see that, it might have helped drive their opinions to have heard both sides of it as well and see we're working for them.
Well, it sounds like we all value transparency, right? And it's huge because it does go to keeping an informed electorate. And when you don't do that, again, I don't know if it's deliberate or just institutional thinking that, well, it's not that important, it's out there, people can get to it if they want it. But how many of us have busy lives, right? And people they need to feel like they're being helped, right? And just help me out a little bit with this. And I think that's a great idea. So what else can we?
And that also comes down to change, that's a change because what has been done for years and what we are, trying to implement now is a little different, right? So obviously the change is more important, and obviously that's where I believe the term limit also comes to because the new people can bring new ideas because the same people running for 3, 4, or 5 terms, obviously you become comfortable doing one way, and you sometimes become blindsided with the other way, which might work better when it comes to transparency and giving information to people. So that's why change is essential, and the new people are also needed, right, to bring that change.
Yeah. No, I'm again, from the business side, I love the contrarian views that most new people bring in. What I've noticed is when you introduce a new idea, it somehow puts people off because it almost puts them on the defensive, like, oh, maybe I should have been doing that all along, right? So you have that resistance to the change. I think it's great. It makes us better. In business, if you're not getting new ideas, you're dying, quite frankly. So that's the kind of thing I think you all and I agree that the council can certainly.
And things start to come full circle because if you want to be more inclusive, if you want to drive transparency, if you want to create balance, then what do? You do some things. The mechanical part can drive the cultural part. So the mechanical part is, what are you actually going to do to potentially change that? Maybe it's term limits, maybe it's district representation, maybe it's having the full notes back, maybe it's seconding the motions. But those things that you can, those meaty things that you can actually do in order to help drive that cultural part of making it a better environment to get things done. And then the same mechanical pieces can help drive those tactical pieces that you might want to drive, which might be, what do you want to do about the financial piece? What do you want to do about the traffic piece? What do you want to do about the trash piece, right? I mean, those same things can help drive better decisions in both areas of decision making.
Like it. Rolling.
Yeah. So that's it. The main thing is getting, fresh voices in there and others, and don't have ownership of the town council when you're really just serving. And it puts that service back into the town council as opposed to a dynasty. And we've seen that, and I've traveled around the world, working State Department, UN, and almost every single time that we're trying to clean things up, it's because a certain group of people closed off and thought they were the right minds to make the decisions for the others. So it's never healthy. It doesn't work out. That story ends the same way every time.
Yeah. Inevitably, change happens, right? And either you're part of it or you're against it. So, what are the top items you're hearing out there that concern residents most? Just off the top of your head.
Sure. Few things, especially the traffic situations. People are definitely worried about that. Especially the Herndon Street and some other streets also. It's getting more congested, right? For the growth and development, how rapid, how slow, how do we do that? That's the biggest concern for people. Yeah, if I have to pick 2 concerns, obviously, and you guys might have some.
And that kind of links into the, I guess there was a survey that the town did. I don't know if it was 6 months, a year, 2 years ago, but the 3 biggest things that came out of the top 3 were traffic, transportation, finances, taxes, and then the small town feel. And I think if you kind of look at just I would really love to see maybe leveraging some new technologies. If you think about transportation and you think about the way things are changing, I heard this morning where Metro's having a really hard time with ridership because of shared rides, right, with Uber and those guys. So they're having a difficult time, and they're trying to figure out how they can get those rides back. But that may not change, right? You may have more shared rides, and then you're going to start seeing self-driving cars and technology that may be able to take advantage of that. So how do we leverage technology in signal phase and timing in order to try to maximize the whole lane departure sequence? We actually move traffic based on real-time activity, pulling data in from the streets, and being right here in DC, maybe we can go figure out a way to leverage some money from FHWA in order to do some studies in Herndon in order to figure out how to take advantage of technology and traffic.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I loved putting this in the context of, this is a microcosm of the country. This same conversation you can have at the county level, at the Commonwealth level, and at the country level, right? How do we leverage these things without letting what we have become obsolete? Because let's face it, the process and the behavior of transportation, my one nephew doesn't have a car. So you think about how when we grew up, that was the first thing we wanted, right? Where's my car? Now it's like, I don't need a car. It's like, well, wow, because transportation is now a service for these folks. We're living in this service-oriented world.
Herndon's in a great position, I'll have to say, when it was designed to have a parkway, and so it loops for the people that aren't familiar with it, as opposed to just having a main street that just goes through town, which we do and intersects with Sterling Road. So Centerville roads and Sterling roads were our traditional main roads. Drainsville coming into that as well too. So every town has about 4 arteries that feed into it. Well, Herndon put a parkway in. Think of all of our legacy towns, and we don't have a lot of parkways around that circle the entire town. So we're a huge advantage in that compared to others. So we can work on some solutions. But the problem to that is that because we're beside the toll road and the greenway is not segregated, they flood Herndon. So it's a problem that we have.
Well, we'll have that topic of discussion when we come back. I do also want to hit some of these other hot items that you guys have been hearing out there. I know I've heard a couple. So, folks, stick around for our final segment. Appreciate you coming back. See you in a bit.
This is the story of a boy who is very sensitive to lights and sounds. So he built secret hiding places where nothing could get in. The boy didn't like looking people in the eye. It made him feel uncomfortable. One day, he found out he had something called autism. His family got him help, and slowly, he learned how to live with it better.
Early intervention can make a lifetime of difference. Learn the signs at autismspeaks.org.
What do you think you're doing, Kevin?
Was just gonna drive home.
There are several warning signs present that you shouldn't be driving.
Like hearing voices?
Like your text-to-emoji ratio?
Oh man, the selfies.
Selfie, nailed it.
We all have warning signs that let us know that we're probably not okay to drive. Mine is pretending to be your subconscious.
Craig, come on man, let's split a ride home.
Being a dad is an adventure full of special moments.
A cruise!
Surprise! Unexpected moments.
I got this.
And even awkward moments.
Okay, Dad, thank you.
But every moment you spend with your kids, even the smallest moments, can make the biggest impact on your child's life. So take a moment to be a dad today.
So, I'm kind of new here, but I've noticed a trend. My human does this funny thing where she goes around and gets all my toys, and then she hides them in that basket by the door. But it's always the same basket, and it's always in the same place. And then she acts so surprised when I find them, but, you know, she's putting them in the same basket. Again. It's like, hello, that's where you put it last time. You were the worst at hide and go seek.
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Hi folks, Cesar here, final segment with our guests from the Herndon Town Council. It's my friend Roland Taylor, Sean Kenneth, and Pradeep Dakal. In this final segment, I just kind of want to do a sort of round robin, hot items, things that, what was most memorable? You're out there talking to thousands of people. What's the one or two things you'll remember most about this campaign? Something said, someone said, you saw, you felt. I mean, just throw that out there.
Sure.
Jump ball.
One thing, I still remember I was knocking at a door and a gentleman came and, you know, he was asking, oh, the town has a separate election. Oh, I remember I gave vote to town council in 2016, but it was all about the presidential, right? So I didn't even know all the candidates, so I still needed to vote 6. So I just look at whatever name seems familiar, whatever name I like, I just voted. So that reminds us back to, you know, the May versus November, because quantity and quality of vote. If people are going there because it's a presidential or state, you know, race, and then they have to vote for Herndon and they don't even know much about the candidates and they just have to choose the 6 names, that definitely sometimes is not a quality vote, right? That one was really interesting to me. Hearing somebody voted without even knowing the candidates and still voted 6. The second thing is obviously, you know, interacted with many people, especially the people who've been living in Herndon for the last 30 years or 40 years. And the reason they moved to Herndon is small town feel. And they were a little concerned about the growth and development, and they were thinking maybe it's an overgrowth, overdevelopment. Are we losing the small town feel? You know, that's another concern I heard from a lot of residents while knocking at the door.
Cool.
Yeah.
John, Roland?
You were, I think you mentioned early in the beginning, you were talking about, you know, third party, and you know, is there a chance for a third party? And maybe that's what I think I heard you say. Maybe that's what we need in order to try to help, you know, bring this cauldron down to a simmer and open the conversations up. And I think one of the things that was interesting to me is knocking and talking to people is how frequently I get the question, "What are you?" You know, what are you? And I think that the answer that I like to give is, well, obviously the town shouldn't be having a party conversation necessarily, and I'm an independent, I'm looking at the issues of the town, and how frequently I actually would get people saying, well, you know, then you know, what are you, right? And trying to have that conversation. So I think as you kind of go through that, if we can implement some of these things about openness and inclusion and balance, then maybe we can get people to really think that, I don't know if an independent's a third party or not, but at least maybe there are some ways to open the door to not necessarily think a party is the only way to solve the problem.
Yeah.
Yeah, for me, most of it, we had the Chamber of Commerce hosted a really nice Meet the Candidates event, and it was well received. I didn't know exactly, we've had a couple other little events, but this one was really neat, and what inspired me after we're kind of tired of knocking on doors and we're tired of, you know, worn down every day walking 8 to 10 miles and seeing everybody and responding to everybody, and plus, you know, have a life and be a parent. But it inspired me because I saw so many young couples, and I saw some of our seniors and others come down sincerely with a really open mind and really had, you know, involved questions. And I walked out there. Sometimes you wonder if people do care or they're really interested or doing their civic duties. And there were so many that showed up and had some really good challenging questions. But the biggest thing for me is it resonates constantly is, and we try to tell people this, and Sean referred to the town survey, and I think development was like out of 10, 7 or 8. I mean, the current council is pro-development, and they just don't seem to get it from the people that say, I didn't choose to move to Reston. I didn't choose to learn Sterling. I didn't choose to go to Ashburn. I chose Herndon. And the reason why I chose Herndon were community events and the activities for families and our schools and the life of a small community where I felt like I would be involved with my children as well as their friends and their sporting activities and others, and we have strong religious opportunities for them there, being a legacy city that some of the newer development areas don't have. And I tell people what our industry is, it's raising families, and that's what we do good. And when you get a single family home and you start a family, the two things you don't have are time and disposable income. And so those activities in your community are very important, and development is just not something that the majority of people are really interested in, and it just doesn't resonate with the path that we've seen. Now, we were going to get hit with a metro, and we're blessed to have that, and most towns would love to have that opportunity, but we're the only town, in Northern Virginia that's sitting on the line like that. So it is a great opportunity, but we don't want to get lost in losing our values over that, because we have so many major developments, Reston and innovation in Loudoun County coming around us that could potentially bring in 30 to 60,000 more people surrounding us.
Wow.
We just shouldn't get in that competition. Let's do what we're good at and take care of the people that are there and make them safe and really work on our community. And we've got some legacy communities that aren't being focused on. But if a developer comes in town, they'll give them anything they want. But we've got 70s built neighborhoods, and the sidewalks in disrepair or other issues. We've got to focus on everyone.
So throw it back real quick. What you've been doing the same thing? What
Yeah.
So
Sure.
what are you hearing?
Yeah, absolutely. So to finish off that point, I hear I don't want a mini Reston. I want to maintain this sort of small town feel, and I think that's the change we need, right? And I think I represent. Let's look at what we're doing. Let's look at what we're going to do going forward. For me, I think the most touching one was off Alabama. And I walk up to the store. It's just one person on my list to talk to. And it's one of those sort of two-level little townhomes, very cute. And the gentleman's name was, I forget the name, but he didn't speak English. And I think, my Urdu isn't good at all. In fact, it's non-existent. And the great-grandson came out. The gentleman was about 82. And he looked like he had just been cleaning up the bushes and everything. He just had stuff in his hair. But the entire family came out. He didn't speak English, but they did. So I started asking them questions. And the great-grandson was translating, and everyone was getting excited that I'd come to his house to ask him about the town issues. And that was the coolest thing for me this go-round, was the entire family was helping him get the information so he can vote for someone. By the way, I told him to vote.
And that's back to you go right back to helping people feel like they're part of the part of the process.
Apparently,
right?
no one's hit this house before, but he had like 7 or 8 family members come out, and it was really cool.
And even if the vote ends up being a pro large development vote, if there was conversation because there were some differing ideas, maybe you get to a better solution, right? Maybe you get to a better answer, incorporating what those folks you talk to into the solution, and then you incorporate district representation and term limits into that, so that more of that starts to happen, and then maybe the culture. No, I don't think any of us are saying things are bad, right? But I do think that we're saying changes can help make things better.
Things can be better, and I like what you were touching on that event by the chamber. What if they did that quarterly, right? Meet and greets quarterly. I bet you'd have a lot more touches with more people, that they would feel more empowered, more connected, that they had some stake in what was it. I'd love to see that, if not quarterly, maybe by annually or something.
Absolutely.
Just something that gets people
so
there.
So people can come in.
Because you're accessible. You're not rushing into the meeting or into a work session. You're there to talk to the constituents. I think that would go a long way.
Fantastic idea. And then you can promote it on your social media in order to try to help make people know about it. Right. If you've got 7 people on a town council plus other people that are in Herndon in town government that do some promotion, you could get that out to a lot of people to let them know that it was happening, and you wouldn't have to spend a whole lot of money to do it.
And that promotes the open dialogue as well. As a matter of fact, I came to know more about Herndon issues in these last 2 months campaigning than what I knew before. And that didn't happen because I was preaching my ideas, but I was actually genuinely asking people, what are your concerns? How long you've been living in Herndon? 20 years. what made you stay here? And obviously they give some good reasons, and if there is anything that you think can be done better or any concerns, and they explain and the concerns they have, and that way my agenda became more stronger actually stronger after interacting with the residents. So obviously it's not just about preaching your idea, but actually listening to the people who you are representing, because I think that's the true servant leadership, because the people you are leading needs to be more empowered than you are.
You got it.
So, yeah.
In a community like Herndon, what makes it really special, and everybody understand how much we love it, is our volunteers are what make Herndon great. We have so many volunteer coaches and mentors, and all our community clubs and activities they do are all holiday events. Everything's run by volunteers. And there's people that want to help and step up, and there's people that new that move in and they just want to be asked. They just want to be asked, so being an optimist for so long in so many different sports, you just go ask people on the sideline, would you like to help? I'm like, well, yeah, I would. I don't know a lot. If we'll mentor you, we'll help you. There's people in Herndon who want to volunteer and get involved. They just don't know how. And so we have so many HOAs where we can reach, large groups of deals and venues that they can have us meet at. I think we need to meet with our small businesses because that's the hub to it. We need to have innovation, mentoring activities to get some of our, as you know, entrepreneurs, to get them to have businesses in Herndon, and make it an easy process, not intimidate them to come to City Hall and fill out paperwork and not know what to do. But we should have workshops and clinics to get them engaged in small business, because that's the heart of our town.
Yeah.
I think you guys were all there the other night when we sponsored the fundraiser at a local establishment for Semper Canine, the service dogs for vets. Great turnout, right? There were a lot of people that actually turned out to help support the event. There were folks at the establishment that actually helped with the event, and we ended up raising, it wasn't a ton of money, but ended up raising like $800, and somebody went away with a 50-50 too. So they so the money was good for the charity, and at the same time we had that community involvement.
Yeah, and the other thing, one of my agendas is obviously entrepreneurship, and that has made people so excited that new ideas can be discussed, and people having ideas can come together and discuss, and some of the ideas might find some implementation, right? So that means people are always looking a place to interact, share their ideas, have them opinions heard. And obviously, we have to go towards that direction. I can definitely tell you that.
Well, awesome having all three of you gentlemen here. I think you would be an absolute valuable addition to the council. So, wish you all well.
Thank you.
I know you'll do well when you get on there. So, but appreciate you coming back. And folks, I wanted to give you insight on Herndon and the potential going forward. I want to thank my guests again, Roland Taylor, Sean Kinnis, and Pradeep Gurkal, for coming on. We'll be back soon.
Thank you.